Hi, this is Jeremy Jansen, and indeed, this is the February 2011 issue of Reason Wizardry. For the last few months, I've been hard at work at a new refill, which incidentally, you should be hearing right now in the background. And I've been working with some new devices as I develop this refill. And one of those devices that I've been working with more than usual is the RV7000. And for this month, I wanted to take a more detailed look at the RV7000 and not just describe its features, because all of us must have used it so much at this point that to get the regular sounds, the reverbs and basic delays that you need, you've all probably done that enough that you're experts at it. But what I want to show you about the RV7000 is how it can be used in different ways as a device to create resonances and special effects, something different that you wouldn't usually use the RV7000 for. So to do that, I'm going to go through a variety of the algorithms that I feel have the capability to create these unusual resonances and effects. This month, as we're looking at different RV7000 techniques, we're going to be running them through 3 different sounds so that we can get a sense of how these effects will work on different types of sounds. So what I've got here is 3 different sounds set up in this combinator. The first sound is using Thor. It's a sequenced patch from the factory bank. And next we've got a drum loop from Octorex. And finally, we've got a dulcimer sample from the factory library that I've just added a simple matrix sequence for. So by working with those 3 different sounds, we can see how effective it's going to be to run them through the RV7000 in the different ways that I'm just about to show you. So what we're going to look at first is the small space algorithm in the RV7000. I feel that this is most definitely the most underrated and underused algorithm in RV7000, and actually one of the most underrated effects in all of Reason. So to start describing that, I am going to start with the drum loop, and we'll listen to what small space can do with that. So we'll hear the dry drum loop one more time here, and then I'll transition to wet. So with small space, what we've essentially got is a very fast delay, and you could almost classify it as a comb filter similar to the one in Thor or Maelstrom. You can hear the similarities in the sound, the lower size that you use. So let's go down to the minimum size allowable. So if you've played around much with comb filters in the other synths, you're going to recognize some similarities there in terms of the sound for sure. We can also hear this comb filtered effect on the other sounds. Let's bring in the dulcimer. So you can hear how it starts to smear the initial transient of the sound as well. And now to Thor. You'll notice that as I move the size parameter, there's some parameter crackling. And that pretty much means that modulating the size parameter of small space isn't really going to get you very far. You can do it using combinator modulations, especially with new CV inputs with Reason 5, but you're not going to really want to because, as you can hear, there's some crackles there. Luckily, some of the other parameters with small space don't crackle as you adjust them, so they're more suitable for, say, LFO or sequencer modulation. So now I'm going to bring the drum loop back, and I'm going to explain some of the other parameters of small space. Okay, so in addition to the size, which is actually the delay time of the comb filter, we've got the modulation rate, which is affecting the, or I should say is affected by the modulation amount. So with the modulation amount, you're actually modulating the delay time, and that means the size of the small space. And when you use a high level of mod amount, it will actually take away some of that characteristic resonant comb filtered sound, and it'll become more of a affected smeared sound. So you might be able to hear it now more as I move size up and down. It's much less pitched than it was before with mod amount at 0. Okay, we've got pre-delay as well. I don't find that useful for what I use the small space for. I like to use small space as a completely wet mix to add new resonances and tone to a sound. Pre-delay is only going to be useful if you want to use it mixed in with a dry sound. It would be more useful with tempo sync. Of course, you could run the small space through a tempo sync delay and get a similar effect to that. Okay, so moving on to wall irregularity. I can't say exactly what's going on in the background, but to my ears, it's adding more delays and it's becoming more complex of a comb filter. It's especially noticeable when we turn up the decay on the small space. See, you can hear multiple resonant pitches there, can't you? Now, as I slowly turn down to 0 wall irregularity, you'll just hear one resonant pitch. So it's creating more of a complex small space that has multiple resonances. If we try it with a lower decay, it's more subtle, but it still sounds more complex and less predictable. Let's try this with a different sound. Let's bring in the dulcimer again. It's a little bit harder to tell the difference there because there's multiple pitches in the melody itself. The drum loop is inherently unpitched, so we can make out the wall irregularities easier. You could hear how turning up mod amount on a pitched sound like this completely makes a mess of it. High mod amounts with high wet values are really only useful for unpitched instruments like drums. So you can hear with full wall irregularity, full mod amount, and high decay, we almost have something totally different here from this drum loop. Even though we've got an algorithm called small space, by turning up the decay, we've got something akin to, say, ambient drums. Okay, one more control that I haven't described yet is the different room shapes. What I've found is that they all have slightly different resonances, and we may be able to hear that more easily with wall irregularity turned all the way up and switching between rooms. So they definitely have different pitches to their resonance. I'm not sure if there's any science behind what those pitches are, but you're definitely best off scrolling through the different room shapes to see what suits your sound best. We can turn on a very short decay. We almost get a unison sound here with turning up our mod amount. Okay, back one more time to the dulcimer. So we can almost change the body and the resonances of the instrument to something slightly different by using small space. So no matter what you're affecting, whether it's drums or a synth or something realistic, I find small space very useful for making subtle changes to the sound. And it's something that you can easily fade in and out using a dry wet control. And it's a sound that isn't very common. So even if you may have kind of played out the regular comb filter sounds, you can go into small space and definitely come up with some new stuff. We are going to now move on with another algorithm from the RV7000, and that's the spring algorithm. So the first thing I'm going to do is play back actually the dulcimer and the drums at once, and hear how that sounds. What I've done is panned them left and right. Okay, so I've attached a stereo imager to the end of the signal path, and you can see how we can observe that there's quite a bit of stereo content, obviously. Having these two very different elements panned left and right gives us a lot of stereo content, which is demonstrated by the large amount of red LED movement, I should say, on this display. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is turn on the spring with stereo off. So you can see with stereo off, we get a mono spring reverb. So now with stereo turned on, there is some stereo movement. But just observe it for a little while here and listen to it. And I'll turn back to dry. It's much more stereo in the dry mix, isn't it? Maybe we can get a even better idea of that by completely hard panning these sounds. Now you can see we've got almost completely stereo content, completely different content in the left ear as opposed to the right ear. Now let's turn on the spring reverb. So there it's visually demonstrated, if you're not able to hear it that well, that the spring reverb is compressing the stereo content of whatever is sent into it, even if stereo is turned on. So, might there be a way around that? That's what we're going to look at right now. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to add another RV7000 Reverb. So we'll duplicate the device, and then let's flip it around, and what we're going to do is, instead of sending our mixer just into the first RV7000, we're going to send the left input into the first RV7000, the left output, and the right output into the second one. So you can probably tell what we're going to do right now is use a dual mono approach, sending the left signal into RV7000 spring all by itself, and the right signal into a separate RV7000 spring. And then we should have a true stereo RV7000 spring algorithm. Okay, so we've got the left and right, and now we need to output them. They're going into the maximizer, so we want to take the left channel and we want to take this left channel, but remember it's actually the right channel from the mixer, and send that into the right channel of the maximizer. And now let's play things back again. So that's dry. it actually doesn't matter if we have stereo turned on anymore, because we're actually just sending a mono stream to each one of the RV7000s. But you can see that our stereo image is preserved now. So even without such extreme example of stereo, you're still going to get a better stereo image when you use this dual mono approach to hooking up your spring reverb. Of course, you'll want to do something like create a combinator knob that will control both wet-dry rotaries of both reverbs so that you don't have to turn them one at a time. Okay, so now that we've conquered that limitation of the spring reverb algorithm, let's talk a little bit about the different settings in the spring reverb. So the length of the spring reverb controls the time between repeats. It's basically the length of the spring, but you can think about it as delay time. Let's listen to that. Obviously, you can't change this parameter in real time. You can hear that playback actually stops as I'm moving it. Decay still functions as somewhat of a feedback control. And then we have dispersion, which is hard to define, but I almost hear it as almost like a pitch or an envelope follower connected to pitch. So you get this little pitch bend effect whenever something with a high input level hits the spring reverb. It's on right now. Let's turn that off. And then you can control where that pitch bend happens to the sound with the dispersion frequency control. And finally, there's the diffusion control, which determines the density of the reverb and how realistic it sounds and how grainy it can sound at its bottom level. You can see visually how, with lower diffusion, it's actually just a series of delays. So as with a small space algorithm, I like to use the spring reverb completely wet as another type of resonance or tone control that you can't get very easily with other ways. So let's explore that a little bit by using the dulcimer. Once again, I find it's best to work with small lengths. So as before with small space, it's something fairly subtle, but it can definitely add something new to the sound itself. Alright, now it's time to look at the echo algorithm in the RV7000. And along with that, I've changed up some of the sounds that we're using just so we don't go crazy listening to this issue. For the dulcimer, I've switched that over with a guitar, but that's the same sequence. And I've put a different drum loop in Octorex. And I've got a different Thor bass sequence as well. Okay, so we're going to start with the guitar and just look at the echo algorithm and some of the basics behind it. So let's get the guitar back here. So this is a very simple delay algorithm, but what's nice about it is, in contrast to the DDL delay that's been around forever, is that this is a stereo in, stereo out delay. So if you send a stereo signal into it, as opposed to both the DDL and the spring reverb, which we just looked at it, you're going to get a stereo signal that's virtually identical in stereo content to its outputs. While there are many patches that use multiple DDLs to pull something like this off, it's really quick and easy to call up the echo algorithm if all you need is a basic stereo delay. So it does go a little bit farther than that, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So you've got the diffusion parameter, which is pretty cool. So it smears the delay and gives it, according to the manual, it gives it more of a reverb character. Spread even increases this effect, and to my ears, it adds many multiple delays that are near the main delay line. As far as I can tell, spread does nothing on its own if it doesn't have diffusion turned up at least a bit. As before, you've got decay as the feedback control. So what's great about this is that both diffusion and spread are fairly good for modulating. Spread is not perfect. It doesn't click, but it doesn't sound perfect as you're modulating the parameter. Diffusion sounds great. So the diffusion control is a very unique control that I haven't found in even VST delay devices. So it's interesting to take advantage of it, but what I found as a limitation was that you can't get ping pong type delay effects with diffusion using the echo parameter. Of course, you might say, well, ping pong and whatnot, you probably want to use multi-tap for that. But with the multi-tap, you don't get the spread control in addition to the diffusion control. But what we can do is a similar technique that we did with the Spring Reverb and use two RV7000s to create a ping pong echo. So let's give that a try. We will duplicate the RV7000 and we'll flip the rack around. And what we want is a Spider Audio merger and splitter. And then we're going to take the output from the mixer and split it and send it to both of the echoes. Now we're going to take the output from the echoes and put them into a new mixer. Let's create a line mixer here. And we'll send its master output to the maximizer as before. So now we'll set different delay times, let's say 5/16 on this one, and we will hard pan left and right the two mixer controls. Let's turn diffusion down and you'll hear how it's a regular ping pong. Of course, you could do something like this and have diffusion turned up only on one side as well. Okay, so there's our hybrid echo multi-tap ping pong, whatever you want to call it, delay. I'll quickly let you hear what it sounds like on our other sounds, starting with Thor here. With the drums, it's very easy to demonstrate how the spread parameter affects the sound. You get a much more drawn out reverby sound with spread turned up, whereas diffusion almost just gives almost like a reverse reverb type sound. It's still got a quick decay though. So by changing both channels, you can get some really crazy stuff, especially when you're in pure wet delay mode. So now we're going to move on to the multi-tap algorithm. I don't have a massive amount to say about the multi-tap algorithm in the RV7000, but I do have a trick to share with you when used with drum loops is pretty cool. But first I'd like to talk about the stereo content of the multi-tap. And first what we'll do is just play our drum loop through dry. And you can see we have a small amount of stereo content, so this isn't a mono signal coming from this drum loop. So now we'll turn on fully wet, and you can see we've got mono. So the multi-tap algorithm, unlike the echo algorithm, but like the DDL device, is a mono in stereo out delay. So if we feed it a stereo signal, it first downsamples it to mono before it goes through the different delay taps. Most of the time that's fine, because with a typical multi-tap, you're going to use many taps, probably panned hard left and hard right for that ping pong effect. But if you're going to use this trick that I'm about to show you for mangling drum loops, you're probably going to want to keep the stereo content of your drum loop. So in that case, we're going to once again need to duplicate the device. And use our dual mono structure to send it through both devices. All right, there we go. So now let's play back the drum loop through the delay. And you can see we've still got stereo content there. All right, so I've found that using the multi-tap delay just with 2 taps and no decay, when you run through a drum loop fully wet into a delay like this, you can get some interesting syncopations and changes to the loop that you could actually use instead of the original loop. So let's hear the dry drum loop one more time. Okay, now we'll turn all wet. So basically by changing the timing on tap 1 and 2, which you can see visualized down here, we can get some different variety of loops out of this single drum loop. It's of course just the rhythm that we're changing. So you get the general idea of what we're going for here. The problem with this, of course, is that since you're using a completely wet delay, when you try to play back a drum loop like this from the sequencer, it's going to have an initial delay that's based on your first tap time. So in this case, it's 3/16. So you'd need to move ahead any drum loop 3/16 notes in your sequencer in order to get it to play back in time. Alternatively, of course, you could use Reason 5 to sample the new drum loop and then import it back as a WAV file or as a Rex file. We are going to look at one more algorithm from the RV7000, and that's the reverse algorithm. So let's start out with our Thor sequence. So the first thing to note is that you will get just a stereo delay if you have this reverse dry wet turned down to 0. As you turn it towards 127, this simple delay is turned into the reverse delay reverb algorithm. You can see that visualized here. Actually, this probably isn't the best sound to be testing this on because, of course, a synth sound, the end of it isn't very different than the beginning of it, not like a guitar or a drum hit. So let's move on to, let's say, the guitar here. So that's very easy to tell that you've just got a straight up delay there. Okay, as well, we've got the decay parameter, and that just controls how quick we get to the end of the reversed sound. If you want, more of an even amplitude throughout the reverse sound, you'll want a higher decay, which is actually more of maybe it should almost be called sustain in this case. Okay, we've also got density. Let's turn that down. This parameter, unfortunately, causes problems with automation because it's got some crackles when you're moving it as well. So there's almost more of a granular sound with density at 0. Grainy for sure, and then turned up to full, you've got a smooth reverse. I actually kind of like the sound on this guitar. Sounds like many quick attack sounds or picking sounds with density set to 0. Okay, let's move to the drums here. So it's one consistent sound with density at 127, and as before, it's like many chopped up grains of sound with density down at 0. I find the reverse reverb most useful with drums, especially fading it in with, say, a mod wheel. You get some breathing effect to a static drum loop. So there's one more technique I'd like to show you, and it involves the reverse reverb as well as the BV512 vocoder. And basically what I've done here is split the signal coming out of the mixer, sending one set of outputs to the RV7000 with the reverse reverb, and sending that out as the carrier for the vocoder, and the modulator for the vocoder is the dry mix. So once again, the carrier for the vocoder is the affected reverse reverb, and the modulator is the dry mix. So let's hear how that sounds. So that gives you an idea of where that type of sound with reverse reverb as a carrier signal for itself would lead you. That kind of a technique follows from my curiosity with vocoding a signal with itself. And while you can get some interesting sounds that way, if you vocode affected signal with itself, you tend to get some more interesting sounds. So I'll leave you with that, and I'm going to save that patch as a variant of the reverse reverb patch. Okay, we've reached the end of the February 2011 issue of Reason Wizardry. I hope you liked the issue. And once again, I'd like to encourage you to send me your thoughts on future issues and whatever feedback you might have. So until next month, I'm Jeremy Jansen. Thanks for watching. Cheers.